So, two major stories in play: no kings and the action in Iran. Both are not being reported accurately. No surprise. So let's do that. We'll begin with kings. That is the subject of this evening's Talking Points memo. Okay, so an estimated 3,300 separate protests around the USA on Saturday. We don't have the data because it only comes from the No Kings Coalition, and they're going to put out whatever they want. So just take this with skepticism. Fox is reporting that about 500 groups with an estimated $3 billion in combined annual revenues behind the coordinated No Kings protests. I think that's about right. Some of the groups are Indivisible. That's based in St. Paul, Minnesota, which was the nexus of the No Kings protests. Open Society Foundation, George Soros. People's Forum, that's Singham, the Chinese guy we've been telling you about. The Party for Socialism and Liberation in D.C., Freedom Road Socialist Organization, Grand Rapids, Michigan, Code Pink. So they're all far, far left groups. This isn't an organic mainstream protest that we saw in Vietnam, for example. These are activists, progressive activists, and they're very, very well funded. Okay, millions, tens of millions of dollars pouring in there to get people organized, to get them out on the streets. But it's not unusual. And this is the missing piece. So 75 million Americans voted against Donald Trump in his second term. 75 million. That's a lot of folks. And they weren't voting, most of them, for Kamala Harris, who never demonstrated any kind of acumen at all or problem-solving ability. They were voting against Donald Trump. They don't like him. So to get a few million people out on the street when 75 million didn't want him in the first place, that's not a big deal. But again, it was well coordinated, and the pictures were there, so television picks it up. Now, there was actual glee on the part of the left-wing media. Roll the tape.
Organizers say at least 8 million people showed up. And then on the right side of your screen, you have CPAC. Womp womp. Notice a difference? Which crowd do you think Trump wishes he were a part of?
Okay, lady, I mean, again, why anybody would watch this kind of propaganda, I have no idea. Not many do, but I'm just stunned anybody does. So my question is, all right, you got no kings, and I don't object to that. I think dissent is good. You don't like Donald Trump, okay. You want to show your displeasure, fine. That's what the United States is built upon. Protest. As long as you do it peacefully, and most of them were peaceful, except for the hardcore communists in LA, Portland, New York City. And these are anarchists. These want to blow up the whole system. But most people were reasonable out there, and I have no beef with them. But my question is, what are you protesting for? So we know you hate Trump, but what's your problem-solving ability? Here is the key. Let's just run down a few. So what would the No Kings protesters do about Iran trying to get a nuclear weapon? Simple question. What would they do? I would assume nothing, but that's just an assumption. I haven't heard one solution from any of those protesters about Iran trying to get a nuclear weapon. Okay. Number two, what would they do about immigration enforcement? So how many times, and we'll tell you later on in this broadcast, another horrible, horrible crime committed by a foreign national who's in this country illegally. Well, what would the No Kings protesters do about these people, when they don't want any enforcement from ICE at all, no access, what would you do? How would you stop those kinds of crimes from being committed by people who shouldn't be in the country? Nothing comes forth. What'd you do about the war in Ukraine? You got a plan? How would you handle Putin? I don't know. Do you know? If you know, Bill at BillO'Reilly.com. Bill at BillO'Reilly.com. Two more. Food prices. What would the No Kings protesters do about bringing down price of food? What? And finally, health insurance premiums. Now there is a solution. Socialized medicine. Government runs everything. Government dictates who you can see as a doctor, what you get as far as treatment, and how much the treatment costs. That's what these protesters want. So 1 out of 5, they have a solution to. But generally speaking, all this is venting. We don't like Trump. We don't like Trump. We don't know how to solve the complicated problems. We're not really interested in doing that. We just don't want him. No kings. And that's the memo. All right, let's switch over to Iran. So U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that there are fractures within the Iranian government, whatever that is. Nobody knows what that is. But apparently, according to Rubio, some Iranian leaders, I guess, want to make a deal with the USA and others don't. Oh, he's going to have that. The hardliners, they're never going to give up. Okay, so that's what the U.S. is dealing with. Apparently, there are some talks going on, but it's very, very murky. I just don't know, and I have very good contacts, as you know. I don't know where this thing is right now. The president continues to make threats to Iran, and now troops, 10,000 U.S. troops are going to the Middle East. Now, this has been misreported like crazy. So the 10,000 troops are there to do what they call missions. Some of them are humanitarian missions. Okay, some of them are targeted military missions where there's a certain strategy that has to be employed and can only be employed on the ground. There's no occupation because that failed so dismally in Iraq and to some extent in Afghanistan, although not nearly as bad there. So the United States people are not going to accept an occupation of Iran. Our soldiers are not going to go in and then set up camps to regulate what happens. That's not happening. What they may do, and this is certainly not confirmed by anybody because it would be top secret, is they might do missions. Now, that has not been reported at all. It's the usual hysteria. I don't even think these press people are smart enough to know the difference between an occupation and a mission. And they certainly don't care. So the casualty count remains fairly low. 13 U.S. service members have been killed, mostly in accidental stuff. It hasn't been, nobody's been shot out of the sky or anything like that. In Iran, the Red Crescent, which is their propaganda arm, says 2,000 people have been killed, but nobody knows. Lebanon says about 1,300 people have been killed, but nobody knows, on and on and on. Israel, which is fairly accurate in its reporting, says 19 civilians, Israelis, have been killed since the action began, February 28th. So obviously, you don't want anybody getting hurt or killed, but it's very, very low. So this really isn't a war. This is an action, a military action. More ships carrying oil are getting out of the Strait of Hormuz. It's a good thing. I suspect that if the Iranians don't come to the table this week, that U.S. troops are going to have to do something in the Straits of Hormuz. But I don't know. It's a guess. Joining us now is a guy you may know. Mike Baker was a CIA covert guy for about 16 years And he now hosts the President's Daily Brief, which is a podcast well worth your time. And he knows the turf over there. Am I missing anything here, Mr. Baker? Should I be emphasizing some fact in the theater that I'm missing?
No, I mean, I think you hit the key points. One is using the word murky when we're talking about the potential for negotiations or discussions. Right? I mean, this is a textbook example of mixed messaging, right? Both from the U.S., from Iran, and also from potential mediators. The Pakistanis have been very aggressive in trying to position themselves as the mediators for this. And they're all saying different things. President Trump, in the course of one Truth Social post, said that, we're having talks, productive, deal close, and then in the same post, but if you don't, we're coming after you. We're going to obliterate you. And so the Iranians are saying there's no talks going on. And, the mediators are saying, well, we're very hopeful about potential peace negotiations. So it's no wonder that the population is incredibly confused. As far as the operational side of this, I think you hit the high points here, which is that, look, they are not talking about a long-term occupation. And we went into Iraq in 2003 with over 150,000 troops, to engage in that conflict. We knew we were talking about a long-term operation. We've got 2 Marine Expeditionary Units. We've got some elements of the 82nd Airborne out deployed now in theater for the Iran conflict. So at the likely scenario, if there's not some miracle of negotiations, is that those elements will likely be used, as you pointed out, for these quick, specific, targeted missions. Possibly seizing and destroying infrastructure on a handful of the islands that the Iranians use to help control the strait. I don't think we're talking about any sort of long-term occupation of Kharg Island. That would be a real problem. And politically, I think the White House certainly is smart enough to understand that nobody is in the mood for a long-term occupation here.
What it looks to me like is the Iranians, whoever they may be in charge, I don't even know if there is anybody in charge, want to wear us down economically and believe that the U.S. press, which is true, is against the action, and then that will drive public opinion about President Trump down and maybe ignite inflation here. And then worldwide, we already saw Europe not supporting the action at all. And then Iran's hoping that China and Russia will come in on their side. So it's a waiting game for them. The longer this lasts, the better it is for Iran, correct?
Yes. And I think the one part of this that was clear at the beginning of this conflict was that it would come down to the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranian regime has used that before as a weapon. They've always threatened it as a weapon. And so it was clear that they have no other leverage really to speak of in terms of influencing the international community. So, of course, it was always going to come down to them creating the chaos and attempting to blockade, in effect, the strait and doing what is now currently happening, right? Paying a lot more at the pump as far as the voters in the U.S. and in the EU are concerned. So, yeah, that was a given. The Russians and Chinese, you know what, they are helping. I think there's almost no possibility that they're not providing targeting data in terms of satellite imagery, assistance on the intelligence side in terms of movement of U.S. personnel and assets. The Iranians have had a quick series of strikes, the Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi, and targeted and destroyed some aircraft, injured a dozen U.S. service members. And that ability was enabled, almost, I would put my salary on it, by either Chinese or Russian or both assistance in terms of that targeting to make their strikes more lethal.
But they don't have many weapons left, I understand, in Iran. I mean, we've downgraded them to the sense that their ordnance is very low. Is that true?
Well, yes, we've degraded their military capabilities significantly. Their stockpiles of missiles, their launchers. And look, that was, from the Israeli perspective, the missile program was more of a threat in the short and midterm than the nuclear program. So from an operational metric, if you look and say, are we winning this thing? Can we declare victory? Well, yes, from an operational perspective, we can, because we have had significant success in degrading their abilities and also their manufacturing facilities for these munitions. So from that metric, yes. From the metric of if you went into this and said, well, we want a better government in Iran for the betterment of the Iranian people and peace and stability in the region, which frankly all the regional actors, the Saudis and others would like to see, then that's a little bit mixed. That's not quite the victory.
Yeah, we haven't seen that. Do you believe that the Iranians are close to enriching enough uranium to build a bomb? Do you believe that?
Yeah, I believe, look, once you're at 60%, and by all accounts, by a lot of different measures, they were stockpiling 60% enriched uranium. There is no civilian or peaceful need for anything really above 5%.
So if that's true, and Lindsey Graham on my podcast absolutely walked us through that, why wouldn't Europe then be on our side saying we just can't afford to have a theocracy that hates infidels be able to build a low-level bomb that could blow up Paris? Why wouldn't the European countries support us?
Well, I think in part for the same reason the Gulf states wanted just stability and no issues, and they want to just keep kicking the can down the road. Yeah, I know there are issues
right there.
Look, every administration in the U.S. has kicked this can down the road, right? Just thinking, okay, we'll put it on somebody else's plate. And so I think there was a strong tendency in the EU and in the Gulf states to say, yeah, we get it. We don't like the Iranian regime. We don't want it. We understand there's a threat here. But, let somebody else deal with it.
Yeah, but somebody else in 4 weeks. I mean, we were talking about a very short period of time where this uranium could be melded into a bomb. See, I don't get it in the sense that, and I'm going to deal with the Pope in a few minutes. All right, so yeah, nobody likes this, and this is wrong. Nobody wants people to die, but when you have a potential where 10,000 more people would die, aren't you, morally compelled to deal with that rather than look the other way, as millions of Americans are doing, millions, and almost all of the NATO countries are doing. They just don't want to get involved.
Right, they don't want to get involved. They want somebody else to deal with it, and in this case, the U.S.
They don't want us to deal with it. We're somebody else. They don't want us to deal with it.
Yeah, there's good reporting that said, MBS and the Saudis have been pushing the White House to continue the fight, right? Let's get rid of this regime.
Very few, though, and that's an economic-based thing. Last question for you. So, looking ahead, President Trump's got to worry about midterm elections, or he loses an enormous amount of power if the Democrats take control of Congress. And how big a factor is that going to be? And again, the Iranians know that in his trying to at least come to some conclusion here.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The Iranians, particularly the political side of that, right? You've got the politicians, you've got the theocracy, you've got the mullahs, and you've got the military, the IRGC primarily. Frankly, the IRGC has cemented their position as the top dog within Iran at this point. But those elements are sophisticated enough to have read the tea leaves here. They understand that politics drive everything in Washington. So you're absolutely right, which is why when that gas price rises and you're spending over $100 to fill up your truck, right, or people start hearing this boots on the ground concept, which immediately leads people to think, oh, we're talking long-term occupation. There's a potential for the Republicans to have their butts handed to them in the midterm election. The White House knows that. And so I think that's why we're seeing these mixed messages about, well, we got these negotiations going on. We're having some productive talks. But if they don't work, we're going to have, we're going to obliterate the infrastructure. I think that's why you're seeing the White House work hard to try to get this message out that they are having discussions, because they're trying to keep that narrative top of mind that this is not going to be a long-term conflict.
I don't know if the Iranians are going to do it. I wish they did. Mr. Baker, thanks very much. Final thought of the day. We are very busy on BillO'Reilly.com, but we made it easy for you. So we got three things. We got Sharippa on Do It Live, our long-form podcast. We got the City of San Francisco Collapse Special. And we got me with David Spade and Dana Carvey, the two SNL guys. All you have to do is go to BillO'Reilly.com. And we have a little clicker. You can go see any or all of those three. Can't watch them all at once, but we're making it as easy as possible for you to do it. And I think you'll enjoy them all. Okay? So we hope you check it out. Thank you for checking out this edition of the No Spin News and Bill O'Reilly. We'll see you again tomorrow. So I'm at Yankee Stadium last night. The Yanks and the Blue Jays playoff game. And before the game, they play the Canadian national anthem because the Blue Jays are from Toronto. And some morons in the stands boo. More than a few. Wasn't overwhelming, but it was audible. I'm sitting there going, what is wrong with you people? Why would you boo the national anthem of Canada? What good does that do? Canada doesn't have anything to do with us. I mean, yeah, Trump wants to annex it as the 51st state. We know that's not happening. They'll come to some kind of trade deal. The Prime Minister Carney was here yesterday, and they weren't brawling. So why are you booing the Canadian national anthem? It's disrespectful. And all the people in Canada watching it, come on. It's the same thing when they boo the national anthem, right? So I just sat there. And I think foolishness is on the rise in America. It's not as bad as evil, which is why I wrote Confronting Evil, because that's definitely on the rise. But foolishness is annoying. And then the Yankees won the game. It was a very interesting game, by the way. Jeez, I'm sorry. Going to find myself. By the way, his head is now said on news agencies about 30,000 times a day. So I'm sorry to say it. Anyway, I just want to get that off my chest. Talking Points memo is about the brawl in the Senate yesterday. So before former FBI Director James Comey was indicted, we'll tell you about that in a couple of minutes, the Senate Judiciary Committee, that's the big oversight committee, invited Attorney General Bondi to testify about Epstein, and now there's accusations against Tom Homan that he may have taken a bribe, stuff that the Attorney General deals with. Now, Ms. Bondi is a smart woman. I had a long conversation with her in September, and she knows the game, that the Democrats on the Judiciary Committee are going to try to use her to embarrass Trump. They don't care about information. They know that any accusation against anybody can't be discussed by the Attorney General because we have due process here. You're innocent until proven guilty. Homan hasn't been charged with anything. Is there an investigation? Maybe. Maybe the FBI is looking into it. I don't know, but they're not going to tell you in case Homan is innocent. Why would you besmirch him? So the Democratic senators know that, and Pam Bondi knows it, so there's no answer to any question. The Epstein thing is ridiculous. It's just absurd. There are rumors and innuendo, and the Attorney General is not going to answer those things, get mired in that swamp. Who would do that? All right. So Ms. Bondi went into the hearing with written put-downs, that's the best word, of the senators she knew were going to use these tactics. Roll the tape.
Senator, I would be more concerned if I were you when you talk about corruption and money, that when you pushed for legislation that would subsidize your wife's company. You know, Senator Whitehouse, you sit here and make salacious remarks, once again trying to slander President Trump left and right, when you're the one who was taking money from one of Epstein's closest confidants, I believe, I could be wrong, correct me, Reid Hoffman, who was with Jeffrey Epstein on multiple occasions. And the senator sitting right next to you tried to block the flight logs from being released. I wish you loved Chicago as much as you hate President Trump. And currently, the National Guard are on the way to Chicago. If you're not going to protect your citizens, President Trump will. First, Senator Padilla, you have gone on for over 5 minutes, and I wish that you loved your state of California as much as you hate President Trump. We'd be in really good shape then, because violent crime in California is currently 35% higher than the national average.
All right, so it was amusing to watch the put downs and then the replies and all, but did it do anybody any good? Did you learn anything? No. Right? No, it was just like an insult derby. And that's what politics has descended into. Now, the last time that the Justice Department was actually given a referral, a criminal referral from the Senate, was 6 years ago. So these hearings are just a total waste of time. And they play to the cameras knowing that the internet and the cables will pick up the stuff, it'll be as outrageous as possible. It's just really, it's wrong. It's just wrong. They're not representing being on both sides, but mostly the Democrats, because they hate Trump so much. And, look, I want some problem solving here. Stop with this nonsense. The attack on Epstein. Epstein is whenever you hear that name, you know that it's only being used to try to smear and demean Donald Trump. That being said, another cliche, the Justice Department should define what the Epstein thing is. They should tell the American people, this is what we have. This is the conclusion that we've reached now. This could change, but that is so simple to do. Take away that club from the radical left. So I don't know why the Justice Department doesn't do that. On the other stuff, again, I don't know what Homan did or didn't do, but you don't besmirch him and try to ruin him on innuendo. And Bondi was right to avoid those questions, and that's the memo. So the National Guard is on the way to Chicago. A fascinating story. First, the facts. Governor Pritzker is the villain here, and I can back that up. So he's been in office for 6 years. During that time, 4,000, mostly African Americans, 80%, have been murdered, and Pritzker has done nothing. What could he do? He could call out the National Guard. Now, President Trump has federalized the Illinois National Guard, so they're going to be called out. But Pritzker could have done that 3-4 years ago. But he didn't do it. Why not? No one knows. Okay? No one knows. 4,000 murdered. Pritzker sits there for 6 years, does nothing. Now, Johnson, the mayor of Chicago, is taking credit for the decline in crime in the Windy City. And that's a legitimate point that Johnson has. Okay? Johnson's racist, in my opinion. He's blaming everything black people is. All right. But violent crime has come down a bit since Johnson's been in office. I don't know why. Don't know. Okay? But it has. So acknowledge that fact. But you still, the national average of violent crime, Chicago's way above it. Way above it. You can't just say, we're not doing anything because crime's coming down a bit. No, you got dead bodies in the street. Last week, 29 people we shot. 29. One weekend. Wasn't even a holiday weekend. Now we got Columbus Day or Indigenous Day, whatever day, coming up. 3-day weekend, I mean, you probably have 40 or 50 shot. Pritzker cared? No. Johnson, Oh, it's coming down. All right, fine. So the National Guard, it looks to me like about 500 of them, some from Texas, some from Illinois. And they're going to be protecting ICE agents on immigration raids. That is the reason they're there. And you know, as we reported yesterday, that the Chicago Police Department isn't protecting the ICE agents. We'll play you the tape in a moment. You know that. And that somebody's got to protect them. If the Chicago cops aren't, or the state troopers aren't going to do it, who's going to do it? National Guard has to do it. And the Guard is there, to be honest, to tamp down the crime in the poor South Side areas where these people, drug gangs, are shooting down people at will. Now, they're not going to say that because you're not supposed to use the U.S. military to enforce local and state law. They'll say, we're protecting ICE agents. So we played this yesterday, but it's worth repeating. 10 cars full of protesters approached 3 ICE agents on Saturday. A shootout occurred. One of the protesters was shot. Of course, the Chicago police knew about it almost immediately, and units were on their way to the scene. And then the dispatcher said this. Roll it.
And again, per the chief of patrol, we have all the units that, for 999, chief of patrol said all units clear out from there. We're not sending anybody over to that location.
62, we're going to clear out as soon as we can, Spud. We're like locked in over here, so we're going to do the best we can to get out of here as soon as we can.
All right, Chief of Patrol is a guy named John Hein, H-E-I-N. I'd charge him with obstruction of a federal investigation, hindering a federal investigation. You can't do that. Now, he may get off. Okay, due process, he'll have a defense, but I charge him. Let's see another point of view. Joining us from Washington, Dwayne Keys, former U.S. Attorney, Western District of Arkansas. He is now practicing with the National Security Law Firm in D.C. He's a lieutenant colonel in the Arkansas National Guard. So would you charge him, this chief of patrol?
I would probably need a few more facts before I charge him. I definitely see your thoughts, and I agree that there's something that needs to be looked into. My number one concern, Bill, is that police were en route. This was not something where, maybe they didn't have the resources or they were responding to a mass
No, they were
casualty
going.
across that. They were going. They were
going
en route. I would also like to know. The ICE agents on the ground. Did they know police were coming? I mean, were they told, hey, help is on the way? Because if they would have told that, they would have probably acted differently, knowing that reinforcements are coming. And then to pull them out en route, it's extremely disturbing for many reasons. I would like to know exactly this Mr. Hines, Officer Hines. I'd like to know, comments that he made beforehand and afterwards, because obstruction really goes to there's a mental state there that you've got to intentionally be trying to obstruct. His actions seem to indicate that. There's a few more details that I would like, but I will say this, Bill. Even regardless of a criminal, a criminal referral, I think there might be some civil issues here. I mean, there is 4318 USC 1983, which means that if someone acting under color of state law, violates your rights, they can be sued. I think there might be a lawsuit here. These people had the right to be protected by the police. They had the right not to be fired upon. And here it is, the police had the ability to intervene and chose not to. That there might be
they would have to do that as private citizens. But remember, there was a woman shot. One of the protesters was shot. She's in FBI custody right now. So it's the Chicago Police Department's jurisdiction, and they wouldn't answer a shootout when we got a bullet. Come on.
And I tell you, I want to add to that, Bill, because this is not a question of a state or a municipality saying that we're not going to enforce federal law or we're not going to aid federal law enforcement officers. What you heard in that clip right there is these are these are state officers, police officers, who are refusing to intervene in state
But they
action.
were ordered, though. They were
I mean,
ordered by their superior.
Yeah.
Don't go there. And you know that guy didn't do it on his own. Okay, that chief of
Absolutely.
patrol,
Yeah.
he's got people above him, the mayor, the police chief. And the police chief tried to say before we got the tape yesterday, Counselor, this is just for your information.
Yeah.
Before we got the tape, and we got it almost first, the police chief went out and said, oh, no, we were answering the call. No, you weren't.
No, we weren't.
And, right. So I think that you're right. There has to be an investigation. FBI should be in there and putting it all together. But for me, if all the facts stay the way we know them now, and then you add other evidence, you got to indict. You got to.
I'll tell you one other thing, Bill, that bothers me. And as you know, police officers are one of the few individuals, they actually have a duty to intervene when they see a crime happening. You know, you and I, as regular citizens, we can walk down the street and if somebody is in need of help or whatnot, medical attention, we can walk right by and we haven't committed a crime. But a police officer, you know, cloaked in that authority, has a duty to act, has a duty to respond. And so to have sent them, had the manpower, had the resources, they were en route, and then to call them off, I mean, you're now violating state law. So it's just a
but the state will never. The state will never.
No, absolutely.
It has to be a federal situation. One final question for you.
Sure.
The Trump administration obviously is moving the guard into Chicago, L.A., Portland, Oregon, but there's a political component to this as well. And the political component is that the President of the United States doesn't want to tolerate anarchy and lawlessness. Will that work for or against the federal government if any cases do go into court?
I think it's going to work for the federal government. I think that the president has the absolute right under the Constitution to federalize National Guard, to send them in to protect federal property. And that's just one aspect of it, just to protect federal property, absolutely. But then if the crime gets to the point, if the anarchy gets to the point that the president sees the need that he's got to go in there and restore law, he's got that authority to do. There's some checks he has to go through. But ultimately, this has been tested. It's gone through the courts, and the president does have the power, so long as he follows the law and goes through the correct procedure. Yes, he can send the National Guard in to restore justice, to restore peace and law.
Right, and Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, could have done that years ago, but didn't do it, and nobody knows why, correct?
Absolutely. And in fact, even when the president federalizes the National Guard and sends them in, they can do it in a cooperation agreement. There is a way for a cooperation agreement so that Pritzker will still have command and control of the National Guard from his state, but will act in relationship and cooperation with the federal government.
President Trump actually asked Pritzker to do that. He requested in writing that Pritzker cooperate with the feds and to get this murder rate under control and to guard ICE agents and federal property. And then Pritzker said no. Again, no reason, militarization and all that. All right, Counselor, thanks very much. I appreciate your time.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
It's a big story. This is a big story. And now it's in Pam Bondi's hands. It'll be very fascinating to see what the Attorney General is going to do. Comey. All right, so he enters a plea. He didn't show up. His lawyer entered a not guilty plea. He's charged with basically lying to Congress, which was investigating leaks to the New York Times about the phony Russian collusion story. All right? So Comey said he didn't have anything to do with the leaks. His deputy McCabe at first said Comey did know about them, but recanted. So this is a tough case to prove. If guilty, Comey get 5 years in prison. That'll never happen, okay? But he could get convicted. Here's what the Attorney General needs to convict Comey in Virginia. The prosecutors need at least 2 FBI agents in the Washington, D.C. headquarters to testify against Comey and say, yes, he knew, okay, these leaks were going on and wanted them to happen or did it himself or whatever. That's tough. If they get that, Comey gets convicted. If they don't, and it's hearsay, harder. But in my opinion, and I have nothing to base this on, I don't think President Trump cares. He just wants to put Comey through the ringer. Final thought. Tomorrow, Thursday, October 9th, right? If you are a premium or concierge member, to BillO'Reilly.com, we will be on the air live at 9 Eastern Time, Josh Hammer and me, taking your questions about confronting evil. It's going to be a lot of fun. Now, I'm going to give you a sample, just so you know what we're getting into here. So Robert from Londonderry, New Hampshire, writes to me, there's so much detailed information, sometimes like you are in the room observing the situation. How did you guys get such personal details about each person and those around them? Well, Hammer is the researcher, so I'm going to kick that over to him, but I can tell you, because I know, we don't use secondary sources. That means that most writers, particularly on history, they read other people's books. And then they take notes from those books and then they put them in their books. No, we don't do that. We do primary source, which means we go right to the site. Now, the biggest break we ever got was the internet, because there are letters and eyewitness reports, criminal reports, all of that now posted on the internet. You just have to know how to find it. And Hammer will tell you. All right? So, for example, when we wrote Killing Jesus, there's very, very little written on a history of the Nazarene. It wasn't like their reporters following them around. Spies followed them around. Okay? Roman spies, Pilate, Jewish spies, the temple authorities in Jerusalem. Now, they weren't coordinated because the Romans and the Jews hate each other. But they followed Jesus around because these crowds were so big when he went to speak. Thousands of people. And the spies reported back to Pilate or the Sanhedrin authorities. So when Martin Dugard, who's now out on his own, writing his own books, he went to Israel. And I convinced the Israelis to let us go into the archives and see the original material. That's why Killing Jesus is such a phenomenal book. Not a religious book. That gives you a little bit of insight. It's like detective work. When you write history from a primary source point of view, you're a detective. You're ferreting out stuff from people who were there who wrote it down. Letters, okay, eyewitness testimony in courts, stuff like that. Anyway, that was a very good question from Richard in New Hampshire. We got tons of them. Thursday, tomorrow, October 9th, 9 Eastern Time. You got to be a concierge or premium member to join us. Another incentive for you to sign up to the best program in the country. Save a ton of money and all of that. You get a free book if you sign up as well. All right. Hope you enjoyed the No Spin News tonight. I'm Bill O'Reilly. We'll see you again tomorrow.